Okay, we're going to stay with the question of the relation of medication to castration. This notion that is so crucial to psychoanalysis, and yet, or because of this, one that we need to continue to interrogate and be alive even to the terms in which it might shift historically, including into the present day. We will be coming to this. I'm going to turn to a particular image, a painting, dated circa 1495 by the master of Los Bayabeses, a settlement in northern Spain, that was probably initially hung in nearby, better known Burgos. He's a painter about which very little, almost nothing, seems to be known. It's titled A Verger's Dream, Saints Cosmas and Damian performing a miraculous cure by transplantation of a leg, and it's held in the Wellcome Collection in London. The painting depicts the legend of how Cosmas and Damian performed a miracle, sometimes referred to as the world's first successful transplantation. A Roman deacon living in the 4th century, Justinian, suffered from a severe illness in his leg and passionately prayed to Cosmas and Damian for help. One night, the brothers appear to him in a dream and transplant, cut off and attach a healthy leg from a man who had died that day, an Ethiopian or Moor. The deacon awoke and found his leg healthy, but it was now a black leg, with his diseased leg now lying next to or attached to the Moor Ethiopian, in what came to be known as the miracle of the black leg. An Ethiopian or Moor. Accounts differ. The distinction is perhaps important. As we know, Ethiopia has a long and venerable tradition of Christianity, and as a Moor, if we take this to designate a Muslim in Spain, he would be regarded as an infidel and hors-la-loi. Jacobus de Voragine, author of the medieval bestseller The Golden Legend, one of the principal sources for the miracle, has him as both, although both terms could be used as generally as to designate someone black or with dark skin. The racial politics of these terms are discussed by Scott Nethersole in a piece I'll be returning to. There exist a series of paintings of this miracle. This is perhaps the most graphic, hinting at Spanish painting's passion for gore that'll reach its high point sometime later with de Ribera. Indeed, the most graphic depictions of the miracle are all by Spanish artists. Who was it who said, speaking of working for Spanish patrons, "Give them more nails"? I don't remember. It's worth noting that this painting was produced, if the circa 1495 dating is correct, at an early high point of the Inquisition. Given the story it depicts, the transplantation of a possibly Moor's leg, this is somewhat remarkable, only adding to the strangeness and intrigue of the work. Can we detect a certain parallel, an affinity between the use of torture en masse in the Inquisition and what we see occurring in this painting? Namely, the notion that it is at the level of the real of the body where the truth is positioned as not simply residing, but could, we say, be determined. We're dealing here with a verger or deacon's dream then, a formation of the unconscious. The title of the master of Los Bayabes's painting has him as a verger, but he's generally referred to as a deacon. What do we know about the relation between dreams and medication? If we return for a moment to Greece and the Asclepia, the temples of Asclepius I mentioned in the second of these talks, we find taking place there the practice of incubatio. Patients, typically having been given a narcotic, would sleep in the abaton or enkoi materion, a dormitory located in the temple complex, with the expectation that they would be visited in their dreams by Asclepius or one of his daughters, who might reveal to them what they needed to do in order to cure their illness. If they hadn't been visited by a deity, or it wasn't clear to them from their dream what they should do, the sleeper could report their dream to a priest, who would act as a dream interpreter and prescribe a treatment. And we have numerous testaments from patients attesting to the effectiveness of this process and providing accounts of their cure. Opium and other substances were used in incubatio to encourage sleep and dreams. De Quincey will describe opium as the best thing for improving the faculty of dreaming. And we should note that dreams were in general accorded far, far greater significance in the ancient world than they are outside of, say, analysis today, with dream interpretation widely acknowledged as a key device for conducting and directing one's life, all the way up to the decision to cross the Rubicon, or in Xerxes' case, invade Greece. Herodotus is littered with references to dreams guiding and determining geopolitical choices. And dream interpreters, professional and otherwise, were found in number in the cities and beyond of the Greco-Roman world. In the Wasps, as Aristophanes will write of personal dream interpreters costing 2 obols a day. You can slice and dice this how you like, but in comparison we can say that our relation to the unconscious is seriously diminished. In terms of the effects of contemporary medication on dreams, the research that exists points, in the case of most classes of psychotropics, to a reduction in dream recall frequency, but with the SSRIs and benzodiazepines generally producing an increase in the intensity of dreams, and sometimes more positive content. Second generation antipsychotics tending towards the production of more nightmares, along with the most significant reduction in recall frequency, and chlorpromazine cited as producing longer dreams. The possible effects of medication on the content of dreams in turn points us toward the question of the terms and extent to which we conceive of the unconscious as changing and unalterable, in regard to which we might want to differentiate between its symbolic and real guises. The former in particular we might regard as shrinkable or reducible, let's say, wo es war, soll ich werden. But is the unconscious alterable in other ways, and if so, how? This isn't a question I'm going to attempt to address right now, but what medication's alterations to dream content does raise is the potential effect of medication on the subject's relation to the unconscious and their truth, a question I'll be coming to take up in the 6th of these talks. In regard to which we could turn to the question Freud raises in a case of homosexuality in a woman, of whether the unconscious can lie. No, it can't. Margarethe Csonka would reveal in her biography what seemed relatively clear anyhow. The dreams she presented to him had been made up. I'm not even sure what it means to claim the unconscious can lie. The effects of medication in altering its representations, though, are worthy of attention clinically, not least in their offering a means of exploring the subject's relation to medication and all this opens onto. As I say, we'll be taking this up in a later video. All of which is somewhat introductory. So what do we encounter then in this painting, this representation of a representation, this Vorstellung Repräsentats? We have Damien holding a pillbox, a golden pillbox that's open, but which we can't quite see inside of, and he's raising his other hand in a gesture of prayer or blessing, invoking God the Father, while Cosmas is on the point of attaching the Moor's amputated leg to Justinian. There's no ignoring the prominence accorded to the pillbox. As you can see, it's there at the very centre of the image, where it stands out in luminous gold, a colour associated with the divine, often being used to depict divine light and the invisible spiritual world. This prominence is rather strange in the context of the image. Why is there a pillbox depicted here? Yes, it's the case that Damien is quite often depicted with such an object, but why is it so prominent, so central? Why is it needed? Why is it open? What does it contain? An anesthetic or sedative? The image could function without it. In terms of the narratives we have, while Dvoragine makes reference to the saints bringing with them an instrument, an ointment, it's not mentioned. Are we supposed to believe it was there in the dream? It's gold, and as I've just suggested, this colour's associations point us in the direction of the divine, and the divine light so often associated with the Holy Ghost. In other words, if we can divide the Trinity into God as Logos, as the symbolic Father, and Jesus as taking imaginary form, the Holy Ghost presents the divine as it emerges in the register of the real. Indeed, we can say that here in this image we have brought together Damien's prayer invoking God the Father, and in the guise of this pillbox, the Holy Ghost, while Cosmas is engaged in attaching the Moor's leg to Justinian. Do I need to make explicit what I'm taking this image and this dream as a commentary on? Yes, the loss of the imaginary phallus and its replacement with the symbolic phallus. The similarities, the parallels, the pre-echoes, they're hard to ignore, aren't they? There's an uncanny affinity with what we encounter in the case of little hands and the fantasies of removal and attachment we find there. In regard to which, I want to turn to the last fantasy, as Lacan terms it, of the 2nd of May 1908. The plumber came, and first he took away my behind with a pair of pincers, and then gave me another, and then the same with my whittler. He said, "Let me see your behind," and I had to turn round, and he took it away, and then he said, "Let me see your whittler." As Lacan attests in Seminar 4, everyone completes the interpretation by saying that the fitter, which he points out is a more accurate translation than plumber, unscrews the whittler so that hands can be given a better one. Only this is not in the text. Nothing indicates little hands has run through the castration complex to the end and in a significant way. End of quote. And yes, Hans's father interprets the fantasy as he gave you a bigger whittler. But there is nothing in Freud's text to indicate this. This raises the question, for Hans at least, if the imaginary phallus has been removed, it's replaced by what? As Lacan goes on to state, if the castration complex is anything, it's that, while somewhere there is no penis, the father is capable of furnishing another one. Adding, the penis always needs to be removed to a certain extent, then to be given back. Naturally, it can never be given back, because all that is symbolic is by definition quite unable to be given back. The drama of the castration complex revolves around the fact that it is only symbolically that the penis is removed and given back. However, in a case like this one, we can see that it is symbolically removed and it is not given back. In contrast to Lacan's exegesis, in this dream, with Damien and Cosmas, the new leg, this third leg, we could say, is attached, while the odd drama of this painting hinges not least on it showing the Moor's leg on the point of being attached. The narratives make clear that this operation was successful. Indeed, despite the discordance between the colour of the Moor's skin and that of Justinian, as we encounter in the painting, the Moor's leg is accepted, something we can configure if we conceive of the Moor as not Christian in terms of the capacity of God's name, the name of the Father, to bring this infidel's leg, an appendage that stands outside the law, within its ambit, within the domain of the law. If the imaginary phallus can indeed stand outside the law, the symbolic phallus cannot. To add, Scott Nethersole, in his excellent piece on paintings of the miracle of the black leg, points out the numerous reasons why this is not an infidel's leg, that this Ethiopian Moor is Christian. The organisation of this image raises a crucial question for us though. Would Damien's prayer blessing be enough for this process to be carried through, to be completed? Would Damien and Cosmas's healing in the name of God be sufficient for this to happen? Couldn't we argue that the very presence of the pillbox here suggests that by itself this isn't enough and that something in addition is needed. Namely, the symbolic father, the name of the father, isn't enough by itself for this to happen. Here, in this instance, let me be clear, I'm not trying to infer always, and that a real support, a real supplement, if you like, is needed for the process of castration, the removal of the unhealthy leg, and the giving and acceptance of the new leg, the symbolic phallus, to be completed. Where Hans had only his father and Freud, yes, whose position in Hans's treatment Lacan compares to God, Damien and Cosmas supplement this with a reel of medication. A reel of medication in which, in the guise of the Holy Ghost, we can detect the Father's presence in the reel at work. There's more to be understood here. I'm going to come in a moment to discuss the work of a better known painter, Fra Angelico's depiction from 1438 to 40 of the miracle of the black leg, that appeared as a predella side panel on the San Marco altarpiece in Firenze, commissioned by Cosimo de' Medici. Damien and Cosmas were the Medici's patron saints. In this image, we see a starkly black leg or leg shape being attached to Justinian, if you know the narrative. Otherwise, they could be removing it. Like in the Master of Los Bayabas's work, Justinian's diseased leg isn't present. Indeed, this question of removal is worth paying attention to. While the Master of Los Bayabas's painting shows Justinian's leg removed, it occupies a quite prominent place in the image, neither that work or Fra Angelico's depiction show the Moor without his leg. For this, we have to turn elsewhere. The work I want to draw attention to is from the school of Castile and Leon, dated circa 1460 to 80, slightly earlier then than the Master of Los Bayabas's painting. Saints Cosmas and Damien healing a Christian with the leg of a dead Moor. Here we see the lower section of the Moor's leg has been removed, and the Moor lies sans leg with the wound from the removal visible. Note again the presence of the pillbox, and this time Cosmas reading from what could be a medical text, but is probably a Bible, God the Symbolic Father's text. Why am I turning to this image? Because this work makes visible the fact that without this removal, the loss of the Moor's leg, the replacement of Justinian's leg, isn't possible. Just as Lacan makes clear in his commentary on Little Hands, without the loss of the imaginary phallus, its replacement by capital Phi cannot take place. You can't have both, at least not at the same time. Fine. But what can this tell us about medication? We know that in accounts of the experience of taking, of being on psychotropics, we very frequently find references to and complaints of a flattening of affect and experience that we can equate with the loss or denuding of a certain dimension of being. The question I want to raise here is, to what extent can we situate this in terms of the way in which medication, via the real, produces effects akin to the loss of being the phallus, i.e. the castrative effects of this loss. As I suggested last time, this is a loss that certainly bears on the subject's relation to the jouissance of the other and the domains of sexual desire and jouissance that psychotropics so often serve to reduce, and which are indicative of the denuding of the aspect of being the loss of being the phallus serves to produce. We'd be wrong to think that having the phallus simply serves to replace this loss, like for like. While this having offers the possibility of the development or enhancement of an alternative dimension of being, we can ask whether, even if these things are hardly straightforwardly quantifiable, whether the loss of being the phallus introduces a loss overall in being. That this might indeed be the case provides at least one pointer towards what is at stake in subjective destitution. The depiction of the Moor sans leg is valuable here then, as this leg is healthy, in contrast to the leg removed from Justinian, invoking the subtraction in the positive, i.e. what it contributes to being, of this leg, the imaginary phallus, that occurs with its taking away. Indeed, couldn't we say that the very presence of the Moor as dead in this work provides an ultimate index of the loss of being that we see taking place here? To return to Fra Angelico's work, the deep, pure black shape we see the leg taking here could quite easily be taken as constituting a void in the image, once redolent of the minus phi that, as Lacan makes clear, resists depiction, but also of the symbolic phallus which resists imaginarization, that, as we know, as a signifier, is always hidden and veiled. As a side note, we could add that for Lacan, the blackness hands will encounter around the horse's head is taken as a representation of the mother's hole, the vagina, comparable with the hole the fitter bores in Hans's belly in the bathtub fantasy of the 11th of April. I was in the bath, and then the plumber came and unscrewed it. Then he took a big borer and stuck it into my stomach. The discordance between the attached leg and the rest of Justinian's body in Fra Angelico's work is stark, starker than in the master of Los Bayabes's painting, and to a lesser extent the work from the school of Castile and Leon, drawing our attention to something else significant, namely the subject's relation to the symbolic phallus and the dimension of alienation at play in this. This isn't something we often hear commented on, perhaps, despite it being foregrounded in hysteria, but it's certainly not only present there. It's a structural feature we encounter whenever the symbolic phallus appears on the horizon or comes into play, regardless of the extent to which obsessionals might want to disbelieve this. And we shouldn't be surprised by this, given the terms in which this phallus, operates as a signifier of desire that reaches beyond the pairing of the child and the mother, and the way it opens on to the symbolic and social orders. So that, as Lacan will note in 1961, The subject's desire is essentially the desire of the other. Desire can only be situated, positioned, and thus understood within a fundamental alienation that derives from our relationship with language. A position he will echo and elaborate on in 1964. Man's desire is the desire of the other. Is there not reproduced here the element of alienation? If it is merely at the level of the desire of the other that man can recognise his desire as desire of the other, is there not something here that must appear to him to be a point at which his desire can never be recognised? We could go further here, but I want to turn to the case of New Zealander Clint Hallam, a serial fraudster and the first person, not including Justinian, ever to receive a limb transplant. Fraudsters, you might think, are practised, comfortable, perhaps or more comfortable than others, with pretending to be someone else. It's their natural habitat, you might imagine. It's what they do. In 1984, Hallam falls from a ladder while working on a building site with a circular saw at an open prison where he was serving a sentence for writing bad cheques. He cuts his right hand off. You couldn't make this up. He gets a prosthetic hand but doesn't like it. He wants the real thing. He scours the world. In 1998, another person's hand is fitted. The operation is technically successful, but Hallam is unsatisfied, and he asks for the hand to be removed, saying it felt hideous and withered, and that he felt mentally detached from the transplant, which was wider and longer than his own. The skin was also a different colour. The exact relation to all of this, to Hallam's reluctance to take his immunosuppressant medication, is difficult to gauge. The transplanted hand is removed in 2001. Even for a fraudster, this appendage, this organ that he'd received, wasn't right for him. It didn't fit. Justinian, little hands, Clint Hallam. Except perhaps, or even in dreams, castration is always complicated. To return lastly to the Master of Los Bayabas's image, we could add further comments about the candle and the position of the sick leg, the length of Cosmas's fingers that clutch the black leg, as well as the presence of the angels and direction of their gazes. And we could draw attention to the arch depicted in the painting, framing the scene of the transplant, that shows a naked woman and man held aloft, supported by what appears to be Cupid and not a heavenly angel. A framing that suggests we're on the right track with what's being discussed here. Note the lopsidedness, the disequilibrium of this arch, as if the two sides, the woman's and the man's, aren't equal, aren't balanced, won't quite fit. While at first glance it might appear the painting has been chopped, if we look at the pillar beneath the male figure, this appears far from certain. All the things the unconscious knows, or all the things an artist's unconscious knows, or might seem to know. But I want to close by returning to the presence of the pillbox at the centre of this image. If we can say the medication this pillbox contains constitutes a support to the operation of the symbolic father, could we say that this medication might, in its possible sedative anaesthetic function, its benumbing, serve to render the process of castration, the loss of being the phallus, the giving of its replacement, and the specific form of alienation this brings, serve to render this process not just tolerable, but welcomed. To return to the comment on the Father's love I made in the second of these talks, is it the case that this is what paternal love can do? To render this castration and alienation acceptable, or perhaps better than this? This is a question neurotics have much to say about. The question of loving this figure that's brought about castration. What does this love have to do with medication? As I asked before, can we not speak of love even when the father as function, the paternal function, assumes an impersonal form, as the symbolic father must, we think, do? It's possible that the relation between the actual father and the three RSI fathers can't be divided up as clearly as we might sometimes like to think. I'd suggest that yes, we can, that we find a certain form or shade of love here, one that exists in an ambiguous relation to the apparent debt owed to the symbolic father, yes, but as we encounter in the master of Las Bayabes's painting, exceeds this, that's from and for the father in the real, insofar as the latter might aid the operation of castration, one name of which might, for some at least, have been the Holy Ghost, but which could now, for some, take the form of a series of other pharmaconic nominations. In the next video, I'm going to be taking things further in the direction of the effects of medication on the subject's relation to the symbolic. If you liked this video, click on like and subscribe to the channel.